That's good. One sec, I'm just going to get the recording going as well.
Hello.
Hey Rich, how you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm alright, thanks. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
All right. Yeah, we'll figure that out in a minute. We'll sort that out.
Yeah, it wasn't plugged in properly.
There we go. The future.
Yeah. Okay. I'll patch you through to the booth, and yeah, and we can get going. Can you see Rich now?
I can.
That's a beautiful
Hello.
thing.
How you doing, mate?
Yeah, good. You sort these headphones out. Lovely to see you. This is very fortuitous.
You know, it's been almost exactly 1 year.
Yeah.
Tomorrow was a year ago. Tomorrow was the time.
Perfect timing. Maybe we'll make this an annual thing. I think it'd be great. We're just Paul's just still fiddling.
I'll finish fiddling now.
Oh, you finished fiddling now? Is this it?
Yeah, you're off.
There we are. How's your year been?
It's been all right, you know. I've obviously been working in the background. I've been trying to expand my media horizons, which is really hard work, actually. As I'm sure you know. It's a lot of effort and a lot of attempting to collabs and reaching out to people. And a lot of not much coming back. So, yeah, it's been fun in some ways, but frustrating in other ways as well.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, it was always the same with comedy. You kind of... you always just sort of get used to the. It was always going to be someone would go thanks but no thanks, and you kind of had to sort of get used to it, and then you get used to it, and then those, and then that becomes less and less. More people go, oh yeah, come and do this, and now we're like you've just said, we're into a whole new world. And so we're back to square one, where it's all the, I don't know. Well, yeah, maybe later on, but not now. And you know, and
you know what? I don't even mind the thanks but no thanks. It's when you don't even get replies from people.
Get silence.
Get ghosted.
It does make me laugh. There's a few people I've reached out to that have mentioned mental health and wanting to do more about mental health. Yeah. And so I've reached out and gone, do you want to come and talk to me? Come and talk on this. We do this. And I explain who's been on and blah, blah, blah. Nothing. Yeah. And you go, oh, all right. Okay. You want to talk about it, but not with me. All right. That's fine.
What do you reckon that's about then? Do you reckon they kind of lose their bottle? Because it can be quite exposing, can't it?
Yeah, I think so. There is an element of that. There are people that I know, and I know them. I've known them years through comedy, and they're like, yeah, I'd love to come on. And you go, well, all right, then let's sort that out. And then they're like, I don't. It's quite exposing. But when they listen to it, we're not. I'm not out to make anybody feel bad. As you know, it's all about the guest, and so if we do record something and you say something you're not comfortable with, we just delete it. We edit it, and so I think. But people, as you know, people are scared to. I think they're scared to start opening the boxes because they're worried about what's going to come out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people talk about their poor mental health, it's almost inevitable that they have to talk about difficult relationships and things that have happened in the childhood. And I think it takes quite a lot of nerve, and sometimes you don't want to be seen as slagging people off or talking about own family members, for example, in a bad light.
This is going to be terrible. I have to stop you for a sec. I was wondering whether you could just check that you've got the right microphone connected. I wonder when you turned on original sound whether it disconnected the mic, because you sound quite distant. Yeah.
Okay.
Just with the tick up box next to the mute again. Sorry about this.
That's right. It says USB.
Oh, I see.
Audio device.
Okay. I think maybe you just chilled out and leaned back a bit. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
No worries, I'll get a bit closer.
He's got such sensitive ears as producer Paul. just slightly off, and he's like, wait. But that's why it's good. That's why he's good, because otherwise I'd just carry on. Could be anything. I mean, you could have left the room, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds fine. But yeah, go on. So you were saying, people, like you say, they don't want to talk about, family members that are still with us, and I mean, I'm aware of that as well. There's certain things that have happened growing up, and you're kind of like, now's not the time.
Yeah. How's your mental health been for the last year?
It's been up and down, I'll be honest. And I came into the studio today and I said to producer Paul, because I have been really unorganised. Like, I've made such a hash of my diary over the last few months, like worse than I've ever been. And it was just getting out of hand. And then I just came in today and I just said to him, I said, mate, I have just been under this fog of despair. for the last couple of months. That it's just starting to lift, but there's been a lot going on in my private life. The relationship troubles, and and then we had the lockdowns and coming back to work, and so I didn't realise.
What makes you better then? What helps? Do you have like strategies and tactics?
No, it just started. I just felt. I think what happens to me, it builds up and up and up, and then one day I get so frustrated that everything's such a mess that I suddenly go like the Hulk. I just go and I go, right, I'm not living like this anymore. Right, I need to sort this out and that out. I need to make that phone call, that email. I need to apologise to everybody for messing them around, and that's what I do. I get annoyed with myself. And now I can feel myself building the wall back up again. Like, okay, let's sort this out. I don't know if that's the same with you. I don't know if you've got.
You know what? Within the last year, pretty much since when I spoke to you, I've been really trying my best to make this YouTube channel and try and sort of just reach out in different ways to, from writing a book to I've been on a couple of documentaries to doing bits and pieces and magazines and stuff. And it's really sort of tested my mentality, I think, because I didn't realise that I was so fragile. So if something goes well, or if my sub or viewer numbers are going up and I've just done a good interview, done a collab, then I feel great about it for a couple of days. And then if that slows down, or I forget, if not one negative comments, but say like a few negative comments in a row on the YouTube comments, then it really does affect me. And I didn't think that I'd be that susceptible. I thought I was harder than that. And I think a lot of it is to do with my own impatience as well. So when I look at other channels, I shouldn't do this, and I know I shouldn't do this, but I look at competition, I look at other channels, and some of them are excellent, and I have no qualms. But some of them, I think, produce quite weak material, and it really frustrates me when I see them, getting tens of thousands of subscribers and views. And it shouldn't, but it does. And even though I know that I shouldn't be thinking of it that way and looking at it that way, it really does affect me. And so this last year has really shown me how labile I can be, actually.
I know what you mean. I'll use an example. This very week, brilliant comedians have been filming live at the Apollo, and there's been a few comedians have made comments about not being asked to do it, and there's an element of there is not bitterness, but there's a kind of you're envious. You're made to feel, like, oh, am I not good enough? And no disrespect to those comedians that are doing it. It's not about them. It's just about the industry in general.
Yeah.
And so there's a brief sort of thought, like, am I not good enough for that then? Oh, okay. Oh, I must be crap then. And then you start questioning it. And I think that was something else as well. I saw comments and things, and then I suddenly went, no, I'm doing fine. I just need to put more effort into the podcast, more effort into this, and more effort into that, and put more effort into work. And then I'll be fine. And that's what happened. And it started with more, and it just the fog started to lift, and But I get it. You can't help but look. You're a human being.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, as long as what you're doing is what you want to be doing, and I imagine it's doing great. It's going great guns, in comparison to other things. So we shouldn't be so hard on ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. There's what you should do logically, and what you're you naturally do as well.
Emotionally, I know.
Absolutely.
I know. Yeah. And it's funny. And it annoys me in my industry that sometimes the air of competition that gets thrust upon us sometimes. And I'm lucky to be doing what I'm doing. I'm having a great time. I don't know why I'm allowing these things to kind of briefly irritate me when I'm having a good time. Like, I've got my own gigs, I do this, that and the other, and I should just be pleased that I'm coming back and we're not locked down anymore,
Yeah.
Because there's other people that are in far worse situations, which is what we'll be talking about today,
Absolutely.
This is the thing, like you mentioned, what the awfulness that happened in Plymouth.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about it, to be honest. I saw what had gone on in the news, but I hadn't really gone into it, and so I was looking at it right before this.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. I'd heard the term incel. I didn't realise it was such a big thing. It's quite a new thing, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So would it be helpful for me to kind of explain what the ideology is about for your listeners? So it stands for involuntary celibate, and it's basically a movement of young men who are sexually frustrated and they're virgins, And instead of doing what we all did when we all were spotty virgins, I know I was at one point, which is kind of, waiting and biding your time and, working on your game till eventually you manage to get a partner, they kind of egg each other on. So they've started this underground internet movement,
right,
where they have all this misogyny and all these hateful kind of theories. And I think they probe each other to try and be really sexist and be misogynistic and encourage each other. And because of that, they almost weaponize this sexism. And when you get cases like this man, Jake Davison, and there's been a few other high-profile cases as well, they kind of internalize it, and they use the agenda as an excuse to just go out and commit horrific violence. But to ask your question about whether it's new, I think the ideology behind it of being, frustrated, believing that you're lesser because you're not an attractive male, has always been there. But I think that the difference is that now, with the dark corners of the web, there's more of an acceptable area for those thoughts to fester. Because you can't just go out and say these thoughts to the average person, because you might get smacked in the face. But if you find the right group of people that think the same way as you, then it kind of grows and bubbles and festers. It's very worrying.
And this is it. It's funny because they just get to a point where they don't see women as people. They just see them as there's men I know. I literally had the conversation with him 2 weeks ago. We were out, and we were walking back through this. It was a busy street on a Saturday night. And he was going, I wouldn't mind getting my hands on some of this. And I'm like, who are you looking at? He's like, just all of them. And you're like, but what for? And he's like, so it's, you know what it's like, you go out, you just want to fuck something. And you're like, are you listening to yourself? Yeah. And I just had to walk away from him a minute. I'm like, I don't want to be around this. This is awful. But there are still men that think that way.
Absolutely. And what's quite worrying is, and I didn't know about this until I researched it quite recently, is that the incel movement have all these theories as well. So it's not just, I want to get laid and I hate women because women don't find me attractive. They actually have quite deep, I don't agree with any of their agenda, but they've thought about it, obviously, for quite a long period of time. Theories. So, for example, one of the theories is that you could rank all men and all women in terms of attractiveness, say from like 1 to 10.
Right.
And in an equal society, one should aim for ones, two for aim for twos, 10 for tens. But in reality, according to the incel belief system, women try and aim higher than they actually are, which puts like a whole group of men who are at the bottom end of the spectrum who can't attract females without sort of money and possessions and nice cars and blah blah blah. It's all bullshit, but the point I'm trying to make is they think about it so deeply. They literally write like literature and theses about these. Very scary. So
it's almost like a religion, like with these beliefs in place, and then the writings and and like you said, it just eggs them on, and then because that's the thing is when someone else turns around and goes, yeah, you're right, I think the same, and that's how these things become bigger, don't they? Yeah, and then somebody says you should do something about it. Yeah, and then if there's enough risk factors for one individual, like there was with this Jake Davison, then they take it too far, and the results can be catastrophic, as we've seen. Yeah, well, this is it. I mean, having read the story now, and you're like, oh my god, like he took, his first victim was his mum, and then was just onto random people in the street, and which tells me there was something else going on. It wasn't necessarily, like you said, the incel movement was used as a kind of excuse, but something else was obviously happening with him. Yeah, so I think that he probably was clinically depressed, because I've seen some of the clips of what he's put out on YouTube, and he says that he's got a low mood, which is obviously very classic of depression. He also said that he doesn't have the energy or motivation or drive. So, for example, he doesn't feel like he can exercise or work out anymore. He was saying, I'm stuck in this rut. I've been trying to work and I can't get a promotion. I can't save any money. So he's got all these really strong negative cognitions. So I think he's probably clinically depressed. And I think his mum actually tried to get some help from a mental health service. And I think he even engaged with them briefly before lockdown. But the problem is there's a few problems. Firstly, I don't think he got the help that he needed. No. And it's always difficult when you've got somebody who, at that point,
wasn't particularly high risk or didn't have any indications of being high risk, and who doesn't want help. So, because you can't really section them, they're not anywhere near the threshold of being exceptionable. So there's this big gap in the market, if you like, where there's all these people that need help, but it's actually quite hard to enforce it on them or to pressurise them to get help.
That's the thing with this country, well, with the law, and I get it to a certain extent, but they always say like they can't do anything until a crime has been committed, and so they can't. You can't. It's not like the thought police. It's not like you can't. Like that Tom Cruise film. That you can't.
Minority Report.
Yeah. You can't just, like, someone's had a thought, so they're going to go in and get them. Yeah. And that's the thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's a bit like that with the threshold for sectioning somebody as well. So if people want voluntary admission to hospital, for example, it's possible, but it's really hard to find a bed. And then there's such a big step up of how risky you need to be sectioned. That it's like you say, they have to do something that's actually very dangerous, or almost do something very dangerous before they get help. Which is just a big missed opportunity, I think.
Well, this is it. I mean, it happens all the time. You see women that have been attacked, or they've been murdered, and then you read the story and it says, yes, they went to the police 6 times, but the police were like, well, he hasn't done anything. And like, yeah, he's gonna, and I feel scared, and they didn't really know. I suppose you don't know what to do you? Because there's 2 sides to every story as well. But what do you do? What's the answer? I suppose this is the thing. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I think there's a few potential solutions. So in Jake Davison's case, another big factor was the fact that he had a gun license, which just absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah, incredible.
Because he had some other issues. So aside from his mum worrying about his mental health, I think he had his license revoked.
That's right, yeah.
In the end of last year, so December 2020, because he'd attacked some man and his pregnant girlfriend, and then he got his license reinstated about 6 months later. So to me, that just sounds crazy. Like, why? I know. So I think that was the decision of the local police force. So I think even though the UK does have really tight gun laws, I think we can make them much tighter. So, for example, as well as that individual case, if you can't have a gun license if you've got a prison sentence of over 3 years, or if you've had a prison sentence for over 3 years in the past. And I think it should be a much higher kind of threshold. It should be if you've got any kind of history of aggression, any charge of any aggressive disorder. Because why do you need a gun? It's not like in the States where everyone carries one. If you need one for work, if you're a farmer, for example, then fair enough. But the average person doesn't need a gun. Jake didn't need a gun. No. So I think that's one thing that can be done, is that the laws can be made even tighter.
Well, this is it. Like, what did he have it for? Just because he could? I know that people have them. They go shooting at the weekend, or I know my dad did that for a bit. But there were still laws. You can't just have it like next to the bed. You still had to have. If you were going to have your own gun, it's got to be locked away, hasn't it? It's got to be in a proper case. It's got to be this and the other. But like you say, someone like that that's got a history of aggression, of aggressive behaviour, absolutely not. It blows my mind, as you've just said. Why did they say it's incredible.
And on top of that, he was not particularly crafty with his hatred on the internet. So he posted on Reddit, he posted quite a lot of homophobic and sexist material. So it wouldn't have taken a lot for the police to do a quick background check to see that he's got all these extreme views and that he's a bit unstable. So I think, I hate to say it, but I think some of the blame has to go towards the people that made the decision to give him back his license. Yeah,
there was someone somewhere didn't look. They were like, whatever, and which is fine if you're if you work in a shop. you're dealing with lives, people. This is like now we've sadly found out. This is now one person going, all right, fine, just stamp it. It's just changed the lives of so many people.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose it is such a rare event, that, especially in the UK, that somebody will go out and shoot people, that it's really hard to predict. But as you just said yourself, even though it is rare, the consequences can be so horrendous. You have to be on the ball for every single application, I think.
Well, this is absolutely 100%. And what I found as well when I was reading up on the thing, and there were the people that are in these groups, they don't take any responsibility for themselves, like for what's going on. Like, it's always other people's fault. You know, they're not sleeping with us because of this and that. And some of these people, I imagine, could be quite. I know what it's like. I mean, we can all be a bit socially awkward sometimes, and that can put people off being around you. You know, and you know, but I suppose a lot of it, we're a bit more self-aware, so we kind of go, if I'm a bit like, I know I used to be quite a bit rowdy when I was drunk. So then I'd sort of work on it and go, actually, don't get that drunk then. If that's what happens to you, then rein it in a little bit. And that's what I did. And it, you know, and it sort of calmed down. But they don't seem to take any responsibility. It's always it's their fault. They won't sleep with us.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But then what do we do with that? I've read things where they've said that sex workers should be paid to sleep with them. You know, like doing charity work, like doing social work, and you're like, that's not the answer either. Surely that's, well, you know.
I think one thing is that we should start thinking about them as a form of terrorists, really, because what they're doing, well, not all of them, but the ones that commit these kind of atrocities is terror, right? I mean, terror is when you commit extreme violence to try and intimidate either the public or a government behind a set of ideology. So I think we're comfortable using that term with, like, you know, right-wing Islamists or racist or fascist, but why not incels? Because it's kind of the same thing, really.
Yeah.
And if we call them terrorists, then we can use the laws to like shut down forums where all this hate is spread. So I think that's another thing.
Yeah. But this is it, isn't it? Now we're told all the time, and I recently actually, as a friend of mine, who was saying that, you know, they always sound like your phone's listening to you, like your phone's listening to you. And they'd been out on a night out, and then they were saying, look at what happened on my phone the next day. All the videos from TikTok were related to their night out, like everything they'd been saying. And so with that in mind, these forums must be easy to get into, or to be, at least someone somewhere should be aware of what's being said on these forums.
Yeah. I suppose parents have to take responsibility to a degree when the people that use them are quite young. I mean, it's different for adults, and this man, I think he was 22 at the time, so maybe not for him. But when you're talking about adolescents or teenagers, they're very susceptible. And just like parents would tell you off for watching porn or for watching violent films, we should, I think, have some responsibility about knowing what our kids are getting up to online, really.
Absolutely. This is the thing. It starts at home. So many parents kick off because of this and that, and the teachers should be doing more, or they should be. And you're like, no, you should be doing more. You should be aware of what your children are looking at online. It starts with you. But parents don't want that. They don't. In their heads, they're perfect, and little Johnny's perfect, and anything that's happening that's bad from outside is because of outside, and couldn't possibly have anything to do with them.
I see that a lot. So in the patients that I assess, usually after they've been arrested, so they're on remand in prison. Sometimes they have a mental illness. Sometimes they're suspected of having one. The vast majority of them have really poor parenting, or have experienced really poor parenting, whether it's abuse or whether it's just a lack of boundaries. And not all the time, but most of the time when you speak to the parents, it's exactly what you say. They just don't take any responsibility. They just push it onto the school, which is amazing to me. Like, it just blows my mind. You know, I've got 2 young kids. I wouldn't, I'm grateful for anything that the school does in terms of education, but I don't expect them to have my 2 boys, to show how my 2 boys will grow up to be men. I mean, that's just mind-blowing that people would expect that.
Exactly. It's like my boys. It's you know, it took work. Then they are top lads, and I'm not just saying that because they're my boys. They're brilliant. In fact, they're better than considering what sort of what my eldest got married recently. And part of my speech, I said to his now wife, I just said, look, we are an unorthodox circus of a family, but you know, we are a family nonetheless. And that's it. It's been this. You know, there's been all manner of things going, all drama over the years, yet they've grown to be amazing men. You know, and that takes work. It's what you're doing at home, like we've just said. But so many people don't take that responsibility.
Well, congratulations and
thank you.
Raising
yeah. And there was a moment, because my youngest can be a little bit, shall we say, forthright. And a little bit. Sometimes I have to say to him, dude, no, you have to be a bit more thoughtful than that. You know, he's just set his drums up in his room, in his new flat, and I was like, yeah, you need to soundproof that, mate. You've got neighbours now. And he's like, oh yeah, but I'm like, no, come on. So there's still work to be done, but he's still a top lad.
Do you think it's harder to be a teenager or an adolescent now than it was when you were one?
I think there was a because we weren't as aware of everything in the world. You know, there's too much information now. There's too much knowledge. We know too much about what's going on around us. I think there was a sort of an innocence in being a teenager when I was growing up. You know, you knew there was stuff going on. You didn't really know what it was. You saw what was on the news, and it wasn't really in your world. It was on the news. These were stories from elsewhere, and you kind of went, oh yeah, that's not good. You sort of knew that politicians were bad, or most of them were bad, and you kind of went, oh well, you know. But you didn't really know as much. But now we're just bombarded with all sorts of things. You need to be this way, you need to be that way, and you need to have these beliefs and that belief, and blah blah blah. And you're just bombarded. It must be exhausting to be a teenager now. And then this is all as your mind is developing as well. So you don't really know who you are yet, and you're just being bombarded with all these things, and it must be, like I say, it must be exhausting.
Yeah. So my boys are only 6 and 8 yet, so they're not yet at the age where I have to worry about them going online. But I can imagine that, yeah, just like you said, there's so much information. There's so many like influencers or people that have ideologies, not necessarily as extreme as incels, but people that are similar. So are going to have to be hyper aware to make sure that they're careful with what they listen to, and also they're just cynical enough to know that this person's talking bullshit, really. Yeah. I think that's the thing. So when we weren't exposed to those kind of things as teenagers, but teenagers are now, they don't know if somebody that's talking to you on the other side of the internet is like a loser. Basically, you might actually buy into their ideas, especially if you're feeling alone and you're feeling kind of marginalized and isolated. So yeah, I think that's something new or newish that we never had to contend with.
Well, then the other side of it as well. The avenues of conversation are more open than they were when I was growing up. You were sort of told, you're a man, this is how you behave, and this is a woman, and this is how she behaves. I'm not saying that's right, but that's just how it was. And now there wasn't that kind of, oh, you're a man. You don't, if you're upset, you just push that down. You know, at no point did I feel I could sort of turn around to my family and say, I feel a bit down, actually. I feel a bit sad. You were like, pull your socks up. You got to just pull your socks up, get on with it. Whereas now we're able, like, kids are now able to turn around and say, actually, I'm not feeling great today.
Yeah.
Which I think is good.
Yeah, I completely agree. So mental health kind of existed as I think maybe a generation ago when we were sort of adolescents or teenagers, the idea of mental illness existed, but it was only kind of extreme people, the kind of things that you would see, like, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and they're dribbling wrecks and they're having all these delusions and blah, 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 and they're seen as other, and they're seen as something to be avoided, maybe embarrassed about. Whereas now, as you say, I think conversations opened up a lot more, and it's okay to feel a bit depressed, and it's okay to have anxiety. And I think part of that is celebrities coming out and talking about it, which is a relatively new phenomenon. It's not brand new, but maybe in the last sort of 20 years or so. Yeah. But I think the flip side of that is that people become so much more sensitive. There's so much going on with cancel culture and people being offended all the time. I'm on Twitter, but I very rarely actually use it. But I get messages on my phone, and probably 90% of them I'm just like, oh, fucking hell. It's just everybody's always just well, maybe not intentionally, at least not consciously, but in some way misinterpreting something as being offensive and just arguing back. And I don't buy into that at all.
No, I think there is at the moment, people they're just kind of vying for attention, and they want to be the one that discovered the thing. They want to, I was outraged by that first, and you're like, why are you outraged by it? What is it about that that has offended you so much? And you kind of whilst avenues for conversation are opening up, with it being able to talk about how you're feeling, other avenues are being shut down. Like there's no room for debate. We're now like, you either agree with me and I'm right, and if you don't, then you're in the wrong, and you should be shut down, and you should be like, the people have different views, and we're not allowed to talk. You're certainly not allowed to be friends with someone that has questionable views. Do you know what I mean? I don't mean if they're racist or homophobic, of course, that's without question. But there are some people that, for instance, people that vote Tory, and I vote Labour. You know, but it's like you have to stick with Labour voters, and you shouldn't have any discourse with people that vote Tory. You know, they're all seen as the better, and you go, no, there's a reason why they voted that way. So let's talk about it. You know, they don't agree with me, and they want to talk about that. But we're just shutting each other down.
I can't remember who it was, but I'm sure I saw an interview with a comedian recently who was talking about they were accused of being offensive, and their answer was, fine, be offended. Like, nobody died. It doesn't matter if you're offended, and I completely agree with that. So, again, if it's very right wing and hateful views, that's different.
Of course.
But so what if some people feel slightly offended by a joke or a viewpoint? Like, it doesn't matter. The world doesn't have to fit around you so that everything that you hear is nice to your ears. You know, like. Yeah,
this is it. We're not there. There's this strange people. Yeah, they want it to be. Like, people talk about, I don't feel happy today, and you're like, yeah, well, you're not going to feel happy every day. That's just a happiness. It's like an extra thing, but content, like looking around, you're going, actually, yeah, this is all right. This isn't bad. And I say that a lot on here. You're looking for contentment rather than sort of the extreme of happy. But people aren't allowed to feel. They don't feel they should. When they feel nervous about something, they're like, oh, my anxieties. And you go, yeah. You're going to feel anxious at some point. You should allow yourself to feel anxious, because that's your warning sign. That's your alarm system saying, actually, we're getting involved in something here. But people aren't allowing themselves to be anxious anymore. You know.
What are your views on comics being offensive?
I think because first and foremost, comedians should be funny. That's that, and you can make jokes about anything. But if you're just doing things just to be offensive, if you're just trying to just piss people off, I'm like, no, you don't need to be that. There are some things I say that are quite near the mark, but they're more cheeky. I'm like, oh, that was near, you know, and it's more to do with the language I'm using, not really what my views are. Like, I would never make a joke about this, like the subject of rape is not a subject that I think is funny in any way, shape or form. I don't think it's such an awful thing to happen to someone. Yeah. There's absolutely no way that I would joke about it. But, you know, I've taken the mickey out of paedophiles, but then I'm mocking paedophiles. I'm not mocking the victims of these people. And have you ever had anybody come up to you, like, after a show and say and tell you that they're offended or have a go at you about your material? Yes, I have, actually. I had someone, funnily enough, a guy come up. He sort of appeared on the stage next to the stage, and I'm like, "You're right, mate." And I'd done this bit that I used to have about when I was a kid, and how many, like, the sex offenders were everywhere, sort of thing. And then he came on stage. I'm like, "You're right, mate." I just thought he was a drunk bloke, and he came on and he just said, and he sort of grabbed the mic and he said, "How comes we can make?" You can't say, and he said the M word, and you can't say this, but we can talk about sex offenders, can't we? We can talk about that, can't we? And I'm like, whoa, all right, mate. He goes, you're out of order, how dare you? And he got dragged off by security. And then afterwards, I brought the act on, and then I went, and I'm like, I need to find this bloke, find out what that was all about. And he was out, and then I found him, and he was out the front with the woman that turned out to be his ex-wife, but they were still friends. Yeah. And I said, mate, are you all right? And he just broke down in tears, and he just told me this story of this horrific story that had happened to him when he was a kid. And I'm like, oh shit, mate, yeah, I didn't realise. And then even the woman that he was with, she said, look, I know. She goes, I know you weren't mocking people that have been sexually abused, but just sometimes you have to be aware that there might be someone in the room that this is going to be quite a raw subject. And you're like, oh yeah, shit, yeah. And it made me realise that has happened, yeah. Wow. Yeah, but there are people that I think this comes back to the conversation around free speech, and this is a conversation that comes up a lot. I feel that free speech on its own as a thing, unconnected to anything else, is absolutely, everybody has that. It's free speech. You have free speech, and everyone is entitled to that, yes. But then after that, as it's been said many times, there are consequences, aren't there? And that's when, you know, so you can say what you want, but after that, then that's when things get dealt with. I feel anyway. To me, it's all about, like, context. So whatever happened to that man, I'm sure must have been absolutely horrific. The very fact that he acted out like that kind of indicates that. But
you weren't up there. You're not like a pro paedophilia hate monger, are you? You're making jokes about the situation itself rather than paedophilia or the victims. So he didn't really have a right to even though it upset him, he doesn't really have a right to break up the comedy that's going on there.
No.
I mean, obviously his own emotions got the best of him. But I think that comedians can make jokes about anything, and it all depends on who the butt of the joke is, or the context of the joke. So while you were talking, I was thinking of Jim Jeffries. Have you seen the bit he does about Bill Cosby?
Yeah.
Really funny. Like, I think he's
brilliant.
Hilarious.
Jim's brilliant,
and is very close to the bone. Like he basically talks about rape and he's making jokes about it, but he can kind of get away with it because his whole persona is this sort of cheeky chappy.
Yeah.
And he manages somehow to straddle the really fine line and make it about him saying something silly rather than about him actually meaning it.
Yeah.
And that is very different to a comic who is actually making misogynistic jokes where the victim is the butt of the joke.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but I think some people lose that, the kind of subtleness of exactly what the context of the joke is, and that's why people get offended.
It happened last night. At a gig I was doing. And there was the act was on, and what he was talking about was the fact that people use other people's atrocities in other countries to kind of boost their attention for themselves. So they go, "Oh, I'm raising money for this country or that country," and it's a terrible thing. And you're like, "Hang on a minute, you're doing this for you, because what you're doing actually doesn't really help in any way, shape, or form. What you're doing is raising awareness for yourself." And that's what the gist of the joke was. But because a woman watching just got so offended. She didn't listen to the joke, didn't listen to the context. She just listened to him say, "I don't know. I didn't even know that Djibouti was a country. I've only just heard about this because of this man." And that was what he was saying. He was almost like mocking himself, his own ignorance. But she just lost it, and she was going, "You racist bitch, you racist this, you racist that," and she absolutely to the point she got asked to leave. Because she kicks off. So some people don't even, they're ready to be offended. They don't even listen to what's being said, you know.
So I dabbled in stand-up. Did I tell you that before?
Yeah, you did, and we still need to get you on. We need to get you on.
I'm by no means an expert by any means. I only did about 40 gigs altogether. But one thing I noticed, you've probably seen this far more than I have, is that a lot of open micers do try to shock a bit too much.
Yeah.
They swear a bit too much, and they try and think of offensive angles a bit too much. And I think that's just because they haven't yet figured out what's funny or not,
or who they are as a comedian. Yeah.
So and I think a lot of them, some of them are actually quite funny and can make a career eventually, but a lot of them aren't funny and they get weeded out and they never get past open mic level. So I'm sure there are some comics that don't straddle the line very well, especially the open micers. But
that's
professionals
it. Yeah.
know what they're doing.
That's it. When you first start out, you don't. You've got your idols, you've got your people. You go, "Oh, I want to be more that. I want to be more like him or whatever." You don't really know that. You don't, because I remember someone saying to me, "You are good enough. You are enough. You don't need to try and be Bill Burr or Louis C.K. or whoever. Yeah. You is enough." And it took me years to get to that point to go, "Oh yeah, actually, that is. I'm good." And going back to what we were saying about what you can talk about subject wise, and I said, I personally wouldn't do certain jokes about certain things, but that's just because of me. But because I feel I don't have the skills, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it justice. I couldn't do it well. And where Jim Jeffries has a particular set of skills that make it that he is able to talk about these things, I think it would be too clumsy. I don't think I'd get the point across that I'm trying to make. So I kind of go, actually, I'm not going to joke about that, because it would definitely come across, I feel. It wouldn't come across how I intended it. So I'd rather just come away and just keep being cheeky. I feel. But yeah, what do you feel about offensive comedians? Do you think there's a place then? One of the very first things we said at the beginning of this part of the conversation was you have to be funny first, and I don't think I could say it any better than that. Really, I think if somebody's actually funny, then there's very little that will offend me. Yeah.
So being a person of colour, if somebody's making jokes about brown people or about India, that won't offend me if it's funny.
Yeah.
If it's actually funny, that's the most important thing. as I was saying before, I've seen open micers who I think go out of their way to be offensive, but they're not actually funny yet. But why should they be? Because nobody is when you start off. It takes practice, just like any profession. And that, I wouldn't say it offends me, but it makes me cringe. And I've seen a lot of open mic, because all these open micer gigs that I did, especially in London nowadays, where I did this about 3 years ago. There was 15 to 20 acts per open act night, and I was doing a few of those a week. So I saw so many open micers. And a few of them were very good, but the vast majority were shit. Yeah. And you would see people that had just got up there and they're offensive, they're not funny, and it would make me cringe more than it would offend me. Just like, oh, I don't want to. Yeah. Just because you could see the rest of the crowd sort of shrinking, and that offended me more than any material.
Yeah.
And also, if you go on next after them, they completely like kill the.
You've now got to piece back together the room. That's been it is an audience. It's funny about an audience; they will gel as a group, even though they don't know each other. Subconsciously, they go, "Nah, that was awful," right? And then they're just completely switched off, and then you have to go on and try and switch them back on again. A lot of these comedians have grown up. They've watched, I don't know, Jerry Sadowitz, or they've watched Doug Stanhope. What they don't understand about people like Doug Stanhope is that Doug Stanhope is an incredibly intelligent man. Yeah. So he is actually very well read. So he does have the information to back up what he's saying. A lot of these open micers, and no disrespect to any of them, is that they aren't well read. I'm not saying they're not intelligent, but they're not well read. So they don't have the information. So they're just going on and saying the most offensive thing that they can think of.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're just an idiot. You just look, like you say, it's just a cliche.
But Doug Stanhope, and especially Jerry Sadowitz, they play a character, or they play a characterized version of themselves. And they've honed it so that it's offensive, but it's funny at the same time. And I think that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I have to say, doing stand-up for me was so much harder than most other things I've done. Like, being a forensic psychiatrist is much easier than being doing stand-up comedy. Yeah, because well, first of all, it's quite a thankless task unless you've actually made it past the first certain level, when you're doing sort of 5 and 10 spots, for the amount of such a small amount of stage time, for the amount of effort you put in. And the thing that I really couldn't get past was when material worked on some nights and not on other nights.
Oh yeah.
I found that so frustrating, because it just didn't, either you like it, in which case I'll keep it, or you don't like it, in which case I'll throw it away. But if I tried the same material a couple of times over the space of a few weeks and it works sometimes and not other times, you're giving me mixed messages. I don't know what to do with that material. I think it's so frustrating.
Well, this is it. I think over time, especially with my comedy, I've got to a point now where mine is more conversational. So it's the same material, but I'll probably say it differently or in a different order, and so it just sort of tumbles out like I'm just having a conversation. And with that in mind, sometimes you'll hit something that you haven't said before, and it will smash the room. The room will just suddenly light up, and you're having the gig of your life. You're like, oh yeah, brilliant. And then you go, right, I'm going to remember that for the gig tomorrow. And you do the gig tomorrow, and the stuff you did off the cuff gets nothing. And you're like, but I thought, and it's because the energy you put into it, because subconsciously you've gone, oh my God, yeah, I've tapped into something. And so it boosts it along, and for whatever reason, it smashes. And then the next night, they just stare at you. And you just, you have to be a certain kind of
psychopath.
Idiot, yeah. There is an element of that, isn't there, where you that kind of punishment that you put yourself through.
And also, I think it's even harder as an open micer, because, first of all, there's the nerves element, but you only get 5 minutes, which is not a very long time at all. Like, if you've got a strong 1 minute to open and a strong minute to close, you've only really got 3 minutes to play with in between. Yeah. So it's hard, really hard work. It is. I admire people like you that can do it for a living.
I don't even know why I do it. I think I said to you before, and I don't expect you to remember, but I've said that I am fundamentally a shy person. But because I've been doing comedy for so long, it's actually helped me, and I'm a lot more confident than I used to be. But to this day, I still am baffled as to why I do it. I love making people laugh. I know that much. Yeah. But there's in the lockdowns, I had other comedian friends say to me, they were like, "Oh yeah, but you know what we're like. We need the attention." I'm like, I don't need the attention. I was quite happy not. I don't need it. I'm not sitting. I need to be in front of people telling me they love me. I like doing it and making people laugh. I'm just a jester.
Do you remember your first few gigs?
Yeah, I do.
When were they?
2004 was my first. I was booked to do 5 minutes on my first one. Did 2.5, and but there is something. I've said this before. After the first gig, you know whether you want to keep doing it. there's something just switches inside you, and you're like, yeah, I want to do that again. It's quite, it's like going down this, you've gone down a water flume, and you're like, oh, I really like that. I'm going to do it again, and do it again. I'm going to do it again. This time I'll go down backwards. There's something that makes you do it. I don't know, but it's like.
So why was it only 2.5 minutes then?
Because I forgot the other joke I was going to do.
I thought you might have got booed off stage.
No, funnily enough, I left the stage because I got a laugh, and then I left the stage like really early, and the crowd went, oh. It was like, oh, that was quick, And then I was there every month at the same gig then, but it's the same with what you do. What drove you to want to do it? Is it because you find human beings so fascinating?
I think I always had an interest in criminality and like violence ever since I was a kid. So from listening to gangster rap to NWA, Snoop Dogg, as a young teenager, to watching martial arts films, so I always had a slight fascination. I grew up with quite a strict family in a fairly boring little village near Cheshire, so life was a bit dull. So I think to me, it was a bit of a fantasy world stepping out to listen to all this music and watching these films. And then when I went to medical school, I just didn't really have a plan, to be perfectly honest with you, Rich. I didn't know what kind of doctor I wanted to be, didn't even think about my future. Just sort of stumbled through, enjoying the socialising part of uni and just scraping through my exams. And then
I think I remember you telling me that before. Yeah.
And then at the end of it, I was just suddenly a fucking doctor, and I had no idea what I wanted to do the rest. And I went into I did a psychiatry placement while I was in Australia. I was travelling around. I worked as an A&E doctor out there first of all, and then I did psychiatry for 6 months, and in an unexpected kind of manner, it just clicked with me. So I found that I was good at being empathetic when I needed to be, talking to people who either had like a deep psychosis, so they had these delusions and they were hearing voices, and to me it's fascinating to step into their world and just talk to them. Or people who were at their lowest ebb, who came in after suicide attempts, for example. And I didn't know that I'd be any good at it, but I was good at it, and I don't really know why, I just was. And so that's when I first got into psychiatry, and then I basically tried to dodge exams by staying abroad for a couple of years, and then when I came back to the UK, I had to do exams because you either stay as a kind of the equivalent of an open micer, I guess, or you go up the ranks. So I had to do that, and then while I was doing my training, I did forensic psychiatry just as a kind of on a whim for 6 months. It's one of the smaller subsects of psychiatry, so that's in like secure units where people have either come from prison or directly from court. And I liked it even more because of this fascination that I had with crime. And I didn't even really understand what it was or even knew it existed until I did my placement in it. But you get to know so much about the offence itself and about the background of the individual, because they're there for years. So in general adult wards, they tend to be there for maybe weeks, couple of months maximum. But in our forensic wards, the turnover is much smaller because the patients are such high risk. So they stay in for 2-3 years, sometimes even longer. So you see them on a daily basis for such a long time. You get to know all of their backgrounds, their traumas, their relationships. So it's the stories that really drew me in.
Yeah, right.
But it was fortuitous. I didn't have a plan. I just kind of luckily ended up in a place.
I think, there must be something on a subconscious level that you were kind of steering towards. I think there was the same with comedy. I never knew I'd be a comedian, but I must have subconsciously somewhere been steering towards. Or maybe I was just, I loved comedy. I liked pouring a pint, which is why I ended up working at a comedy club. I think there must be something somewhere at work, like driving you on. But going back, I'm going back to what we were talking about with the incels and those, and even that saying that the incels. I don't. I know when there was that horrible story of that poor woman Sarah that got taken and by that policeman. Yeah. And then and then all the things started to come out. Oh well, there should be a curfew for women. And there's that old-fashioned thing like, oh well, what was she wearing? Blah blah blah. We've still got those old viewpoints to deal with that I can't believe are still around. Yeah. It's kind of like why straight away it was like, oh, women, we don't go out at night. So no, men shouldn't be attacking women. Don't wear your headphones at night. Like no, stop attacking women. We aren't dealing. We're not. It seems to be easier to tell women not to do things rather than tell men not to attack women.
Yeah, it does seem like as a society, because you think that a lot of those archaic views would have changed from like our parents' generation, but it seems like society's almost kind of splitting into two. So you've got the people that we were talking about who get really easily offended and who are, I suppose, snowflakes, for want of a better word, and then you've got these people who have these really misogynistic and old-fashioned views, and this is connected to the incel belief system, but also, just as you were saying, blaming, victim shaming, so blaming the women rather than taking responsibility. And I think the problem is because that they're separating. So before it all existed, whereas now, and I think the internet is something to do with this, or has a proportion of the blame, because of Twitter, because of slagging each other off, because of highlighting comments of being offended or making offensive comments. The two groups are separating, and there's no conversation anymore. I think you said this yourself earlier on. If you've got a different view to me, then the automatic assumption is shut up, I'm right, you're wrong. Yeah. And that just shuts down any conversation. So it is scary that these groups are kind of moving apart as well. Yeah,
and it's funny, but I know I was brought up with that. When you'd see that a woman had been attacked on the news, and I know the comments around it were always like, well, she shouldn't have been out that time of night. She was wearing this. She was in a bar on her own. You shouldn't have done that, But men aren't. I think I've said this before, and it might be a bit too extreme. I don't know, but I think from a young age, I think there should be a conversation that young boys should be told, look, this is how you should behave in society. You have the potential to be not attack women, but you have the potential to be a bit of a monster. I don't know. You'd word it better than that, but maybe that should be more of a thing.
And do you think it's the parents' responsibility overall?
Yeah, again, I think so. I think definitely. I think it's I know there's been certain comments growing up that I remember. I think I said something when I was a kid, and my dad said, "Don't say that. That's not very nice." It is the job of the parents, I think.
Yeah.
To start
and
with.
It's a fine line, because you can't just say it's just like we were talking about before about how you get these two groups that can only bicker and can't come to any middle ground.
Yeah.
You have to explain things, I think, to kids. You can't just say that's wrong. Don't think like that.
That's what I mean.
Tell a child how to think. It has to be. You have to let them have the cognitive ability to think things through and understand why there's something they've said is wrong.
Well, I think that's it. Maybe that's a thing that should be, I don't know, that's taught in schools. There's an actual place for it where they actually go, and even if it's like kind of basic, sort of very basic terms, how to conduct yourself around other people, not just women but everybody. Yeah. Which I don't think we really have.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of luck of the draw to a degree, because your parents or your family environment massively influences you. Again, the offenders that I see, almost all of them come from a background of poverty, abuse, neglect, drug and alcohol use. They're just dealt really shitty cards, basically.
Yeah.
And then they grow up to have personality disorders. They grow up to be violent. They grow up to be pro-criminal. And you can see where it comes from. Like 95% of the patients I see, you can totally piece together what their background was like and why they ended up, first of all, becoming criminals, and secondly, having a mental illness. Yeah. And with the two overlapping. And
you can't really do anything about that. Really, you can't.
I mean, you can do a little bit, but arguably it's not. It's like peeing into the wind, really. So you can give people therapy, absolutely, if they're in one of our secure hospitals, but you're fighting against years and years of bad therapy from their background and from their parents, and the kind of the teaching that you're talking about, about stabilizing relationships and how to socialize people, we do that with our psychologists within our secure units. Right. But if you have somebody that's grown up in an antisocial background with parents who are violent and sexist, for 15, 18 years, then it's really hard to reverse that effectively within the space of 2 or 3 years.
Very true. Yeah, very true, actually. I mean, would it be, because it seems like because poverty in general, it seems to be on the rise, and more cuts are being made by the government. Maybe that is that the way to go. They just need to invest more in people. The jobs that people are working minimum wage and they're working. More money needs to be invested in people.
Yeah, I think the answer to most of society's problems is not necessarily directly money, but in some ways is related to money and funding. So everything from youth clubs to more policing to more psychiatrists and other mental health professionals, so that it's easier for people to access those things, to social care, all of it. Yeah. So you're right. Poverty is increasing, but then on the flip side of the coin, people who are very rich are getting richer as well. So I don't think money's disappearing. I think that it's getting siphoned off.
But this is it. It's just It's just the rich taking care of the rich. They're not, and whenever they're making any, they don't say, right, we're going to tax the rich. It's like now, like they're up in like national insurance, and and it's like it's always the people on the ground that get screwed, and then they wonder why people snap and do horrible things. You know, you can't keep doing that to people. It seems. It just seems like it feels more and more helpless. Like they're literally taking the piss in front of us, and we go, "You can't do that," and they go, "Yeah, we can," and we are. You know, and
then people carry on voting for them as well. So
carry on voting for them. Like someone said, the reason that they vote for these people is because they're a lying sack of shit as well. I don't know how true that is, but it's a real. I don't know. Yes, I get really upset about it. You know,
and it pushes people towards mental illness, and it pushes people towards offending. Not most people, but a certain cohort of society definitely. And then there's a slight irony that the criminal justice system itself has taken massive cuts. So there's been cuts in legal aid, prisons are overcrowded. It seems like on every single level there's social problems and there's just a lack of funding. Scary times.
Exactly, but it's not on the level where it's like the cuts aren't made up above. Like we say, it's always they're just slicing a little bit off, a little bit more off. You know, pensions you won't get a pension now until you're 85, or you know, whatever it is. There's always something they're just taking a little bit more off.
I should say that it gives me more business, so I should be happy, I suppose.
Maybe we should all become criminal psychiatrists. Yeah, we should do that. Maybe I don't know what the answer is. These are things that keep me up at night, and it does worry me that far from them turning around and going, actually, we need to invest more in people. They're doing, no, we need to just, the people have enough.
Yeah.
You know, they should get jobs. They should get proper jobs. It's fine that they use food banks. The fact we've got food banks blows my mind.
And with coronavirus, we don't even fully know the extent of how that's going to impact society in terms of poverty, more people needing food banks. Yeah. Scary times.
They are scary times. And I don't know. That was one thing I was told when I was a kid. My dad did say that to me. He said, the world is corrupt from the top down. Never forget that. And I was only a kid as well. I was like 10. I was like, all right, Dad, keep it light. But now I'm like, no, it makes sense. It makes absolute sense. You know? This is, like I say, it keeps me up. It does keep me up. I want to ask you something briefly before we wrap up. And you used the term like person of colour. I don't know how it makes. I don't know. Does it sound patronising to say that? What are your thoughts on that?
You know what? The reason I was laughing is because I've had a similar conversation with my wife actually.
Yeah.
And I think that I said person of colour, but I think the term you're supposed to use now is BAME, B-A-M-E.
Oh.
Black and.
Oh, but then I heard that was wrong.
I think that there is too much effort expended on changing terms to make them less offensive. Yeah. So I don't care, as long as you don't use the P word. I don't really care what anybody calls me, because it's the context and the kind of the tone behind it rather than the actual words. It was a drive in mental health to call people service users rather than patients.
Yes.
And of all the patient service users I've spoken to, not one could give the tiniest little shit about what they're being called. You know, they're people who've got schizophrenia, who are suffering from delusions, hearing voices, they're medicated against their will, they're sectioned. Those are the things that bother them and should be. They couldn't care less what the terminology used for it. I personally couldn't care less. I recorded a documentary for Broadmoor about Broadmoor recently. It was on Channel 5, and I was talking about the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe.
All right, yeah.
And I gave this soundbite, and the soundbite was saying that he was suffering from, like, the whole point of what I was trying to say was that I think that he was actually schizophrenic, but he was sent to prison rather than Broadmoor because what he did was so horrific that the judge thought, because of the public view, politically, he needed to be punished or seen as being punished rather than treated. And I said on this documentary that he was hearing voices that were telling him to kill prostitutes. And then the producer stopped and she said, "Can you say that again, but can you use the word sex offenders?" And I was like, well, no, because the voices were telling him to kill prostitutes. You know, the voices said prostitutes. They didn't say sex workers.
Sex workers.
Sex workers. Sorry, sex workers, not sex offenders. Sex workers. And then so we kind of compromised, and I had to re-record it. So I had to say these voices were Peter Sutcliffe's voices were telling him to kill prostitutes who had been now known as sex workers. And I just remember I did it because she asked in a nice way, and it's her program, so I did it. But I remember thinking, with sex workers, with patients, service users, and with people of colour like myself, is it actually us that really cares? Because I don't think it really is. I think it's other people thinking that are being potentially offended on our behalfs, which is in itself is very kind of virtue signalling and a bit attention seeking, in my opinion.
And it's so prevalent in my industry. This, like you say, being offended on behalf of other people. And like you said, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it, but there's other things that actually need to be, that you should be offended about, and that's the fact that the system is racist, the system is corrupt. That's what needs to be. That's what you should be offended about, not these terms. And I say that as, you know, I said the other day, I was saying, because I said, oh, well, the system's racist. And what do you mean? What do you mean? How many black families have you seen stood outside the gates of a stately home that was from their ancestors? Right? And there's none. This is because that's just what I'm saying is the system is itself racist and corrupt. So that's what you should be focusing on.
So for me personally, if a patient said, "I'd rather you didn't call me a patient, I'd rather you call me a service user," I would listen to them. Because that's a reasonable request. But it's when other people say it that I think, really, do they care? I don't think they do. I think you care.
Yeah. Just treat them with respect and
absolutely,
and help them. I just wanted to. When you said it, I'm like, I want to ask about that because
you can call me anything. I wouldn't be offended.
I think I'll just use your name. This has been fantastic. I'm so glad we did this again. Where can we find you? You have your YouTube channel.
So my YouTube channel is called A Psych for Sore Minds, and I dissect things related to both mental health and criminality and the crossover between the two. So, for example, I talk about like high-profile cases with my own psychoanalysis. I also talk about individual diagnoses and answer questions from viewers, stuff like that. So yeah, find me on YouTube, A Psych for Sore Minds, and I'm on Twitter at Dr S Das, so Dr_S_Das, which is DAS.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on, Rich. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Always a pleasure. Let's do this again in a year.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you a gig. I book gigs now, and I've got one in Hayes in Middlesex at the Beck Theatre. I don't know how near that is to you. I don't know where you are, but we'll have a chat. We'll have a chat after that. But yeah, I'm going to book you. I'm going to put you on if you're up for it.
Yeah, I'm up
yes,
for it. Absolutely.
Fantastic. This has been an absolute joy. Thank you for joining me again. We should do it more frequently.
Okay.
In a year, it'd be great. Nice one. Yeah. Thank you, my friend.
Cool. Cheers, Rich.
Excellent.
Always
Thank you.
Goodbye.
It's a beautiful thing. Fantastic. So for our podcast audio, we'll beautifully end it. But for YouTube, I don't know what to do, so I'll probably just sort of fade to black.
Bye, everyone.